Good morning, members. Good morning, guests. I would like to call the meeting to order. This public hearing of the Joint Select Committee on Local Authorities, Service Commissions, and Statutory Authorities, including the THA. This is the 27th meeting that we are having. And today's committee, we are meeting representatives of the Ministry of Health and the National Emergency Medical Service under the Global Medical Response of Trinidad and Tobago Limited. Members of the listening and viewing audience are invited to post or send their comments or questions via Parliament's various social media platforms, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And we will consider those real-time comments that we may consider and even ask those questions here if it's pertinent. Yeah. I would like to now invite members of the committee, the Ministry of Health, to introduce themselves, and are following them, the members of the Global Medical Response of Trinidad and Tobago. You can start.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair members. I am Asif Ali, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Health.
Good morning, Chair and members. I am Dr. Roshan Parasram, Chief Medical Officer, Ministry of Health.
Okay.
Good morning, Chair and members. Barbie Rupchan, Legal Advisor, Ministry of Health.
Okay.
Hi, good morning, Chair members. Lawrence JSC, Director of Health Policy, Research and Planning, Ministry of Health.
Right.
Hi. Good morning, members. I'm Dr. Robin Sinaran, Head of the Emergency Department at San Fernando and Chair of the Emergency Ambulance Board.
Nice.
Good morning, Chair. My name is John Aboud. I'm Chairman of GMRTT.
Good morning, Chair and members. I'm Paul Anderson, CEO of GMRTT.
Okay. I would like members now proceeding with the Vice Chairman of our committee to introduce herself and go into the right and then the left.
Good morning, everyone. Ramona Ramdial, Vice Chairman.
And good morning, everyone. Nigel De Freitas, member.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Jennifer Betis Primus, a member of this committee.
Morning and welcome. Darrell Smith, member of the committee.
Thank you. Good. And I'm Dr. Varma Dial Singh. I'm the chair of the committee, and I'm replacing Ian Roach, who was here before, and I thank him for his service for the last few years in this committee. Good. The objectives of this inquiry really it's really to assess the capacity of the National Emergency Ambulance Services in Trinidad and Tobago. It is to understand how the resources associated with this service are deployed throughout the country, and to determine the areas of inefficiency in this service and the critical factors, conditions, which are required for its success. As we know, we have the ambulance service, and as a medical practitioner for 30 years, I have heard complaints from way back. I have seen the improvements. So I've seen improvements, and I'm thankful for those improvements. But we also have instances where there are little pockets of discontent, little pockets that we need to work at. And this committee, as well as members from the Ministry of Health and your company, together with other stakeholders, I think our objective is to see if we can get somehow some other relief, some other, if there are little gaps in the system, if we can look and work at those gaps. And part of the discussions today, I would probably introduce 3 recent, complaints that I got personally, and we can see if we can solve it and see if somehow we can get things in place to see if we can put a gap on those. So I would now want to invite Mr. Asif Ali, the PS of the Ministry of Health, to make some opening statements.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning again, Chair, members of the committee, officials from the GMRTT, and my colleagues from the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health takes this opportunity to reaffirm its commitment to the provision of an effective and efficient national emergency ambulance service. As in many cases, this is the first time a person will encounter the public health system, and it allows for immediate care and subsequent transport to a public hospital. In this regard, the Ministry continues to partner with GMRTT in the provision of this service. It is envisaged that today's proceedings will be insightful towards promoting greater monitoring and evaluation and improvement of the service as we seek to continue to provide a quality service to our population. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Asif Ali. Would Mr. John Aboud, the Chairman of Global Medical Response of TNT, please give us some opening statements?
Good morning again, Chair and committee members. GMRTT wishes to thank you for the opportunity to provide whatever information or clarification you seek in carrying out your mandate. GMRTT is a joint venture company between Amalgamated Security Services Limited and AMR, the largest ambulance service provider in the United States. In the this joint venture company was formed in order to respond to an initiative from the government in 2004 to provide accelerated development of the National Emergency Ambulance Service, which was then run by the Southwest Regional Health Authority. As part of the pre-qualification for the tender, bidders must have had at least 10 years' experience in providing the service. Since no one in Trinidad and Tobago had these qualifications, it was clear that the bid was forcing interested parties to pursue joint venture relationships with foreign partners. Amalgamated was extremely fortunate to attract AMR, the biggest ambulance provider in the United States, to partner with us. This decision, in hindsight, was a very critical and important one, as over the years, the joint venture company has been able to draw on international best practice, where today, notwithstanding challenges, Trinidad and Tobago can boast without fear of contradiction of having the finest national emergency system in the Caribbean. The joint venture, GMR and ASSL, working together, have accomplished results that are far above what was foreseen and what either party could have done on their own. We have received positive feedback on the performance of GMRTT from prominent members of the local medical community. GMRTT has gone about its business quietly, but with undeterred focus to their world-class ambulance service, to bring world-class ambulance service to Trinidad. The patient transport volume has grown, not through promotion, but through building citizen confidence in the service. Nearly daily, GMRTT receives praise from the citizens we serve. GMRTT is a company predominantly comprising, in fact, 99.9% comprising of hard-working Trinbagonians who are devoted to the profession and proud of service they provide. We work closely with our employer, the Ministry of Health, on a daily basis as we strive to achieve excellence daily. As one example of where we came from, when we took over this service, there was approximately 20,000 calls annually. Today, we respond to in excess of 70,000 calls, well within our contracted mandate, utilizing state-of-the-art technology. Once again, we thank you and look forward to answering any questions or clarifications you may have.
Thank you, Mr. John Aboud. Okay. Now, what we would like now to have a period of questioning at this stage, and I'm asking members to please divert your questions through the chair, and I would like to start with the vice chair to please start the level of question.
Good morning, everyone. This question, Chair, through you, Mr. Aboud, can you tell me what level of service is given on your ambulance?
Okay. Ma'am, can I refer that question to my CEO?
We have two levels of service, what is commonly known as basic life support, which is provided by emergency medical technicians, and advanced life support, which is provided by paramedics. The advanced life support is substantially more clinically sophisticated. They'll administer pharmaceuticals, do invasive procedures, and have the ability to treat people with acute illness much more severely.
So, Mr. Anderson, do you have paramedics on all of your vehicles, ambulances, on all of them?
No, and we don't contemplate ever needing to have 100% paramedics.
Can you tell me how many ambulances you have paramedics?
16.
16. Out of a fleet of how many?
40.
40.
Mr. Chair? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. First of all, when we do these type of joint selects, we tend to know as members of the committee have some form of interaction with the committees and the teams that we interview. And I must say the interaction that I personally have had with this organization, personally with my family, with co-workers and neighbors, has been overall, I've been very pleased and positive with regards to the service that I've gotten. But of course, you hear things out there. People may not have the same experience that I may have had. One of the things we talk about is with regards to the maintenance of the vehicles. In your submission, you stated that the ambulances are fully operational as 50% is taken out for routine maintenance. What is the average time frame for undertaking routine maintenance of these ambulances? That's one. And how many intensive care ambulances are there in the GMRTT fleet?
Generally, routine maintenance requires a one-day service. There may be jobs that are more extensive as the vehicle gets older, and those would perhaps be out of service for multiple days. Very rarely is it a situation where an ambulance is out of service for a protracted period of time, because we do stay on top of the maintenance. With respect to the intensive care, those are ALS ambulances. Their dual purpose is both ALS emergency response and intensive care non-emergency transfers, and that's the 16. Yes, sir.
All right. And what is the procedure for the decommissioning of these ambulances, and how are they decommissioned in terms of the vehicle disposal over a period of time?
Commissioning of the ambulances, it starts with a specification that we collaborate with staff and experts within our parent organization on the American side. We then seek a converter, a builder, that is either done locally or abroad. And then when they arrive in the country, they have to be stocked fully. Any equipment that isn't new with the vehicle is then transferred. And then retired vehicles are currently in a yard, basically. To this point, we've only retired vehicles that are the government's assets, and so we would hope that one day that the government will take control of those, so I don't have to house them any further. In the future, the ambulances are our assets under our current agreement. When we retire those, we'll figure out an appropriate disposal arrangement.
I recognize Nigel, Mr. De Freitas.
Good morning again. My apologies. I had had to step out to come back. So I heard that you have paramedics on 16 of the 40 ambulances. Is there a particular reason for that ratio? Why 16 of the 40?
The paramedic program is relatively new. It's a very extensive training process. When we started that, we started with an initial pilot group of 4 people, and then created a curriculum. The American parent company of GMRTT operates the largest paramedic training college in the world, in the English-speaking world. And we have stood up a campus of that college. It's a bona fide college in the United States within our facility at GMRTT. And so we internally trained the first cohort. That started with 40 of our current staff. That eventually, in terms of people who completed the program, got us to our current complement of paramedics, which is 18. And so we have a current cohort in training now, which is, I believe, 19 persons. So gradually we'll get to a point, I think, where roughly 50% of the staff is trained to the paramedic level, because there still is a need for basic life support ambulances. Not every case requires an ALS ambulance.
So is it safe to say that at some point all of the ambulances will have, as much as it may not be needed, but at some point you will have a lot more ambulances with paramedics on it? Are you aiming to get to that level in the future? Because you're constantly training individuals, which is great.
I foresee probably a deployment where roughly 75% of the deployment is the ALS ambulance. We could potentially go to 100%, but that's a little bit excessive because not every case requires a paramedic.
Only other thing is, we know that with doctors, specifically in the hospitals, they do training in different places. So, for example, if you've done medical school in England, then you can transfer quite specifically to Trinidad. If you have to do an exam or whatnot, that's fine. But if you're trained in the States, then it's not that you can transfer that knowledge strictly to Trinidad and Tobago. You spoke to a paramedics training program coming out of the US. Is there any, in your opinion, thus far, extra training that is needed, or more specific training for dealing with medical issues to Trinidad and Tobago, much like the doctors have to go through a specific training for here?
You know, the nature of the cases that paramedics in Trinidad versus paramedics in the United States are probably a little different. But in EMS, the types of cases that a paramedic deals with anywhere in the world is pretty close to the same. There may be different intensities, like emergency childbirth is just more common here than it is in most places in the United States, as an example. There, I guess, are very extreme cases of reptile bites or something like that that are very specific to Trinidad. But with that exception, it's pretty standard globally. And we've worked as a company with the National Training Agency to create the local credential for EMS professionals in this country. And that is aligned to, which is pretty common, that is aligned to the United States Department of Transportation, which is the regulatory agency in the United States that creates the standards of credentialing. And a person receiving training through an American institution will be very aligned to the requirements in Trinidad, without question.
I would like to recognize Ms. Ramdial.
Thank you. To the Ministry of Health, from Mr. Anderson's testimony, there are 40 ambulances. Is this adequate enough for Trinidad and Tobago, or do you think there should be more vehicles?
Based on the response that they've been able to provide, we think it is adequate at this point. There may be some gaps in the service. For instance, in certain territories, for example, Tobago, when we had the flooding recently, the vehicles would have not been able to traverse the flooding. I think we have to think beyond ambulances for those kinds of things. We have to think about the use of helicopters for reaching out, the use of voluntary networks like they do have in parts of the UK, where actually regular citizens are trained in certain levels of support, life support, and they are activated through our app network. So we have to think beyond the ambulances alone. But I think the numbers that they have in terms of the response in their reports have been adequate thus far. Yeah.
Could I ask what is the normal response time to most of the average response time?
Our requirements have different response standards based upon the proximity of the ambulance to the case. So for example, if the ambulance is less than 1 kilometer, the response time requirement is an average of 5 minutes. Currently, that's just about 4 minutes for that particular category. And as these sort of bands go up, the response time extends up to a maximum of an average of 25 minutes for incidents that are more than 8 kilometers from the ambulance. And so we've met every one of those for the entirety of our operation of this service.
I would like to recognize Member Baptiste Primus at this moment.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I would want to follow up on the question that was just asked. But before I do so, Mr. Aboud, I just have 1 or 2 questions to you. You indicated in your opening statements that the global medical response presents world-class ambulance service to Trinidad and Tobago. For the purposes of even our listening public, how long has global medical response been operating in Trinidad and Tobago?
About 13 years.
Mm-hmm. And you would have been the chairman of this company for how many years?
From inception.
From inception. I also noted that this company, and based on what you said and from my own knowledge of, in the past, the operation of this company, pretty competent in terms of delivery of service. How many foreigners operate within the company?
2.
2. I gather Ms. Anderson would be one.
Yes, ma'am.
And who would be the other one?
A colleague from AMR, but you really can't check Mr. Anderson as a foreigner anymore. He's married locally, and he's I think he's a citizen.
I understand, and I understand where you're coming from. I would have interfaced with Mr. Anderson many years ago in another capacity. But just a follow-up on the question that was asked earlier. In your response to this committee, you were asked whether there are any areas that are not serviced by GMRTT, and your response suggested that all areas have access to the service. One, can you confirm whether all rural areas and areas with mountainous terrain are serviced by GMRTT? I gather you would pass that on to Mr. Anderson.
Yes, we have responsibility for all of Trinidad. We don't operate in Tobago. It's not part of our contracted scope. But a citizen making a request for an ambulance anywhere in Trinidad, we do have the responsibility to respond, and we do respond. Obviously, in more distant rural and almost wilderness areas are less common than the major demographics in the population-intense areas around major cities. We did have a case recently where the ODPM requested us, and we sent a paramedic to Camuto. He boarded a helicopter, and there was a I don't want to get too much into the details given the confidentiality, but there was a person with a medical problem on the North Coast that was not accessible by roads. So we do get sort of innovative and creative working with local partners to be able to do some pretty incredible responses.
And secondly, are you confirming that under no circumstances a client should be refused an ambulance service due to his or her location?
Not on my watch.
How is the geographic spread of the ambulances? You have to cover Trinidad and Tobago. How is that spread? Trinidad, yes. Tobago is the THA. In Trinidad, what is your geographic spread of your ambulances?
The ambulances tend to concentrate in the population-dense areas. So along the east-west corridor, along the north-south highway, and the deployment will thin out as the population thins out. One thing about EMS is that people move around, and so the call intensity and the call pattern is actually somewhat predictable because people's movements are regular. So you just have to drive on the roads in this country in the morning to know that a lot of people come from, if you will, bedroom communities into Port of Spain and into San Fernando. And so at night, they are certainly more dispersed because people are more dispersed. During the day, they're more concentrated in the urban centers because that's where the people are.
In your submission, you stated that GMRTT has systems, knowledge, and ability to identify developing issues before they occur. And that is reflected on page 16 of your response. Could you share with us what issues GMRTT would usually attempt to anticipate?
Probably the most common issue is delayed patient handover at the receiving facilities. We can predict that based upon prior days and the census of the facilities and available bed space. Things tend to back up into casualty, and when it backs up into casualty, it backs up into the EMS system. We monitor 40 operating metrics continuously, and there are hourly reporting to operational leaders on those things. So if we see patterns start to develop with respect to unexpected call density in a particular area, we're able to react to that and adjust the deployment plan so that additional ambulances are allocated to that particular area. We look at both from a predictive basis, call volume and call severity, and then on a retrospective basis, we look at what is the care provided, and is that consistent to the standard of care and the protocol. And we will then modify the continuing education program from the feedback from that QA system to make sure that we have the professional competency and the clinical competency necessary. What happens in EMS is that there are some things that the EMTs and the paramedics do that are not very frequent, and so they don't get sort of in practice experience, And so those skills need to be honed and sharpened sort of offline in the continuing education program.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Chair?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to ask a question, because I'm liking what I'm hearing coming out of the statements that you're making by way of the checks and balances and the measuring that's taking place and the metrics and everything. What I want to ask is there any kind of data sharing between your company and the ministry? So, for example, you may notice that a particular incident is recurring a lot in a particular area, and by sharing that information with the ministry, they can then implement a program to help reduce the incident of that particular thing. Is there any data sharing going on between the ministries? Because you guys seem to be collecting a large amount of data that helps you efficiently run your institution.
The short answer is yes. We have an obligation to report weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually various information on operations and outcomes to the Ministry of Health.
Ministry, what programs are you implementing based on the great data that you're getting from the company to help reduce some of the more frequent incidences that may be occurring that require ambulances? Do you all have any programs that you can point to that you are developing or have been developed to help reduce some of these mishaps that would require an ambulance service?
Okay, so what we have, I mean, I could speak to two different levels. There's what he described in terms of the handover. So when he picks up, one of the major issues he had sent over to us is there's a handover issue at the A&Es. So we actually met with all the RHAs, the directors of health, to let them know what the issue was. There was a lengthy time in terms of turnover. So going from the ambulance trolley to the Ministry of Health trolley, the RHA's trolley, there was a delay, sometimes as much as, I think, going into 30, 40 minutes at times. So we actually set about to try to turn that around. That would have been early on in this year. And we actually were able to, in most RHAs, to get it down to as little as between 10 and 15 minutes for trolley turnover. And impacting on their end, being able, because their ambulances can't leave until we take the patient over. So it impacts on their service delivery as well. So that's one answer in terms of the actual direct way in which we interact from the reports. Another way in terms of policy is we look at the nature of the complaints that they get. So for instance, you would see people complaining of uncontrolled diabetes, uncontrolled hypertension, and they're responding to those kinds of emergencies. So from a national perspective, in terms of the policies that we develop, we can utilize their data to form policies related to NCDs, which is non-communicable diseases, so that we try to limit the amount of patients that actually have those events. In the North Central Regional Health Authority, they have actually started an outreach program based on the types of cases that are seen in the population. So they would have seen a cluster of diseases, uncontrolled diabetes, uncontrolled hypertension. Based on the reports from GMRTT as well, they would now send doctors and nurses to the community to try to pick up those cases and we had better control at that level, so that there are less cases coming back to the A&E. So those kinds of approaches.
I must commend you for the report you gave. I saw the detailed report that was given by the company, and I'm sure, as you mentioned, it will definitely help the Ministry of Health in their policies. So we gather that one of the gaps we had was the waiting period that occurred in handing over, right? And this has now been somehow, looked into, and so we should get an improvement in that. I think another gap we had was the junk services, like when you're going to an area to let the police services come on board also. I think I saw that in your report. So for instance, you're going into an area and your team may have a difficult situation to manage. And in having that difficulty, you may need the officers on board to help you, probably apprehend, get that person into that situation. Because we may be dealing with a patient who may be somehow delirious for any reasons, hypoglycemic, low sugar, getting on erratic. We may have a person who had a psychotic break, and there was a complaint I actually had, and we will probably look at this, where a mentally ill person, his relative called the hospital for an ambulance, and it was not forthcoming. And they actually didn't get an ambulance to come, and they had to actually hold that person and tie up that person, bring that person into St. Anne's. And again, the police, service did not, come on time. So the how are we going to improve that system where there's a dangerous situation, somebody is, pelting articles at your staff, their staff is at risk, and you would need that support from the police service. Are there any suggestions that, that you will have? For that?
Chair, I just want, you've put 2 or 3 things into that statement. As chairman of GMRTT, perhaps my only function is to hear complaints and deal with them, or to see if these complaints are genuine and what went wrong. That's my job. In that comment that you were making, that you got a complaint, you said the relative called the hospital. Now,
so it was not under your...
Okay, but I want to just make a point that on many occasions, when there is a national or someone from the community is dissatisfied with perhaps the response of the ambulance service, and I hear about it, we check to see what was the chain of information, the transfer of information, and everything at GMRTT is recorded and logged. So they have, this is US standards. So on many occasions, you find that people are calling the wrong place. They call the fire services, well, we call for the ambulance, but that's not GMRTT. They call the hospital, but that's not the right place because that's not the National Ambulance Service. They call E99. And part of their function is to relay the information to us. But regrettably, many times there's no sense of urgency. So we would get the call, but when we check the time that we get the call in our log, and the time that the person says they called for the ambulance service is sometimes a half an hour, 45 minutes. But we cannot know that we're not that good yet. We cannot know that there's a problem, a national outside there is in distress and needs an ambulance service unless we get the call. And so a lot of people just say a lot of information is not transmitted to us, and we have deliberately not. We've had this discussion at almost every board meeting. We have deliberately, and forgive me, not promoted ourselves to the national community in any big way, because success brings success. As I told you, 13 years ago, the Southwest was transporting maximum 20,000 patients a year. Today, we are over 70,000. And sometimes the Ministry of Health will say, hey, what's going on? What you all giving away? Why so many? The reality is that as people get more comfortable with the ambulance service and they realize it's a good service and they can use it, they call. And it's our job to respond. We can't play God. Somebody calls, we respond. So we are not going outside there, because if you go out on the road and you ask 10 people, what is the National Ambulance Service telephone number? I don't know if I could answer properly.
Chairman,
Mr. Chair.
Just real quick. It's stemming out what you say. In terms of the emergencies that come into the hospital service, people coming in, what percentage of that comes in from the ambulance? Because people may drop or drive their own self there. What percentage is that? I have a few follow-up questions to that.
Through you, Chair, member, I don't have the data offhand. We're probably going to have to get that for you.
That's a key question, because I know a lot of people drive this up. Secondly, does it occur, and is there a percentage that when the ambulance arrive at a location and they deal with the person, is it mandatory that they have to take them to a hospital, or is it that it could be settled there and the person could go back to the home? Is there any data in terms of the ambulance being able, and the paramedics and the people in the ambulance being able to service the people right there, that they don't have to clutter the hospital?
Approximately 10 to 15% of the cases, the incident's not found. So somebody called, maybe it was a malicious call or something like that. The EMTs or paramedics respond, they check the area, they ask around, patient not found. Sometimes it's a good intended citizen who thinks that somebody's having a problem when in fact maybe they're just taking a rest, and that patient doesn't want to go. So that's maybe another 10% of the cases where a person who's mentally competent refuses care and transport, and we obtain a refusal, maybe against medical advice, and we leave that person where they are because they're of their own free will. The future is to resolve cases that can be resolved in the pre-hospital setting and not transport those cases where there is a real problem that can be resolved by us and not transport those cases to the A&E.
Okay, you spoke about something before with the time. You know, time is life in terms of some of these things. I've seen in North America where they've actually had campaigns about get out of the way, about when an ambulance is coming, what to do, and so on. Will that assist you all with cutting down that time if that was done? Mr. Abu just mentioned that people may not even know the number. Is it that we need a national campaign to educate the public that will help in these two fronts?
I don't know if that's a decision for me. There's benefit and also counter benefit from promoting the ambulance service and its use. The immediate reaction is you tend to get a lot of misuse when you do that. The people that are having a crisis tend to reach out either via 811 directly to us or 999, or they ring 911 and that goes to 999, and those cases are eventually transferred to us. So in terms of a Trinidadian national having a real problem and being oblivious to how to reach out, I think those cases are pretty rare.
There's any local government, because we all consider you all part of the services. They're special services. In local government, there's a meeting that they have monthly that they're supposed to have called coordinating meeting, where all the services in the region come together, WASA, TNTech, health, Pure, and so on, are invited to let everybody know what's going on. Before they start this meeting, you'll see the paving the roads and WASA park up waiting to dig it up right after. That's to help with the coordination. Have you all ever been invited, Ministry of Health, to those meetings with the ambulance service, and is it something that will assist? Because I know sometimes in the hot spots where there are issues going on with criminal, I don't know if you all have had issues going into those areas, because I know a lot of these services have issues going into those areas sometimes. Have you all ever encountered any issues in those areas?
Excuse me, 1 minute. This brings the term the cooperation with the police officers in apprehending difficult patients, as well as going into the hotspot areas. Another question I'd like to ask, Mr. Smith, you mentioned that the corporations, do they have ambulance services also? I know they are attached to them. There may be certain doctors involved. So, but I don't know if it comes under the city hall, or would anybody be able to clarify? Are there ambulance services attached to City Hall or San Fernando Borough Corporation?
No.
There's a medical team there. Not your ambulance necessarily, but other from their, no. Okay.
Not that I'm aware of, Chair.
Okay, sure,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
But in terms of the question with the hotspots, do you all get any issues going into?
Yes.
Yes, we do. I mean, we don't have any areas, hotspots, if you will, that are off limits. Obviously, we have heightened sensitivity about certain locations in this country. Everybody knows that. If it's a violent case and we have evidence of some type of violent situation, the job of EMT or paramedic is dangerous enough, and so we will stage in the area, in a safe area, and wait for TTPS to go in and secure the area and advise us that it's safe for us to proceed. That happens with varying success, in all candor. The incident of unexpected violence where we didn't have any prior indication, that does happen as well. And our people are trained to escape those scenes. And there certainly have been times in our tenure where that has happened and people have been really at significant risk.
So I guess there is a need to have some better cooperation with the police officers. We have already established that fact. And I'm looking at, is there a need to have public awareness, to raise awareness of the numbers? You know, probably Ministry of Health may need to do that. I know there may be some fallbacks, as you say, something is so good, people may assess it. But then you have when someone makes a call, you have a two-tier system where you can actually judge what is happening. If it's an emergency that you have to be on the scene with your acute life support team or just the basic health team. So you already have that in place when a call is in place. So what I'm saying, if we are thinking about persons may abuse the system, I think that judgment, could be, left to your team when that call comes in. Is it an acute case that needs that acute life support system with your high-tech team, or is it something that, can take a little more time?
We do prioritize. We use an international standard. In fact, our dispatch center was just internationally accredited to that process. It's not precise. It's based on the information that you obtain, and Trinidadians are very clever people, and they know what to say to get an ambulance.
Yeah, I would like to recognize Ms. Ramdial, please.
Thank you. Just going back to a previous topic with respect to paramedics on your fleet to the Ministry of Health, Dr. Parashram. Are you satisfied with 75% of the fleet being equipped or having paramedics on them, or would it be better with 100%?
Well, I think we always have to look at the outliers when we look at the percentages. If we have 100%, and it depends on the availability of the ambulances, as he said, there's the likelihood that if you have a 75%, or 25% of the ambulances possibly could be in a situation where they may not be able to adequately respond because of the way they are distributed. So, I mean, of course, 100% would be our goal. But again, you have to look at the cost benefit, and you have to look at the actual occurrences of the events and make a decision based on that. So, of course, based on historic trends, he would probably place 75% of them where he would have seen the events occurring. So it would have decreased that window, but there's still always a window of chance that the capability should be higher. Yeah.
I would like to recognize Mr. De Freitas.
Thanks again, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just trying to envision the logistics, more specifically at the beginning period where you get the call. So far I've heard that there's two ways to contact or get an ambulance: through direct call, which is the 811, or the emergency service. Now, I know you've said that with a direct call, it's up to international standards. Everything is recorded. I'm not sure what the standard is for the emergency service. And I guess this is to the ministry. Do you not think it's better to have one that is put out to the population? So, for example, if you're going with 811, so people can call them directly, so that the recordings are there and you can get that data, and you leave the emergency numbers alone for now, or they use that as a secondary emergency number. Do you not think it's better that way? Because in the States, it's 911, and that's it, right? I guess they could call an ambulance directly, but everybody knows 911. In Trinidad, we know it as the emergency numbers that we have. We're now hearing there's an 811, but it seems that with the 811, they can assess better the need for an ambulance at that point. Because look what's happening now. We're hearing that we as Trinidadians are clever, and we know what to say to get an ambulance. Well, that's wasted time. That ambulance could have gone to somebody who truly needs it. And that really starts off with the point of you have two numbers that you're working with. So if we have one number that everybody knows and subscribes to, and that standard is set to the same international standards that the direct service is using, then we can properly treat with missed calls. I would call them mishaps or missed calls, where time is wasted in terms of ambulances going to situations that they didn't really need to. So what do you think, Ministry of Health?
Before ministry responds, I want to agree with Mr. De Freitas that sometimes you're reaching out for an ambulance, they may call the hospital, and they may get one response. And sometimes they may call outside St. John, and people go down that list and they don't know which ambulance service to call. And I will give a scenario that happened recently. But before I go that, we actually would need, one number that people can call, and that could be dispatched to, So this is something I think we have to look forward, and maybe in our report that we may want to recommend. Yeah, good.
Thank you, Chair. Remember, we do advertise the 811 number. I take the point of the committee. Maybe it needs to be improved upon, maybe more widely disseminated, but it is available, and we do have it advertised. But yes, there is definitely a need to consider having the population more aware of the 811 number. Just to say that, just come back to Mr. Anderson's point, even though they have the 811 number, that does not necessarily reduce the likelihood that that those who do not need the ambulance service will not still access it.
No. They will, You can't stop them. You can't change their behavior. What I'm saying is that based on the standards at the dispatch, they will be able to pick up on trends. right, and be able to put things in place to properly deal or reduce those types of calls. I don't know what the standards are for the let's say the 999 service, but we're hearing that there are international standards for the 811 service. So every call is recorded, and you can go back and audit those calls over a time period and say, well, listen, people are getting smart, this is what they're saying, this is what they're doing, and you can change the types of questions that the dispatcher would ask that individual to sort of decipher out exactly what is happening at that point in time. In other words, there's a potential to make that particular service better. And that's why it's important to ensure, just like as using 911 example, everybody knows 911, even outside of the country. So much so, I think you said earlier that people call 911 and it goes to the 999. So it's that level of widespread knowledge of the number that is required, and then the checks and balances and the measuring on the back end that is needed to reduce the incidences where you waste ambulances' time.
May I ask the members of GMRTT, they certified emergency medical dispatchers. How many dispatchers are currently employed at your company? And please outline the training that was undertaken by these dispatchers.
The certified emergency medical dispatcher is a credential from the International Academy of Emergency Dispatch. And they have standards. It's a certification. It's a telecommunications professional. So we have 24 full-time, and then there's some of the field staff are cross-trained as EMDs in addition to being an EMT, and some of the EMDs started as EMTs. So that's to provide relief for when full-timers are on leave and that sort of thing. We do have a few part-time, but that's pretty rare. That training is, they go through we bring a person from the academy to Trinidad to conduct the certification training. There's an examination at the end of that. They have to perform on that examination to a passable level, and they're issued their certificate. They then go through an on-the-job training program with our systems, because that's not part of that certification. So we have a very, very sophisticated computer-aided dispatch system that they'll go through a period of training with a senior member of staff, and then they are monitored in the dispatch center, in the center, so that they are sitting side by side with an experienced person until they develop their own workflow. And then they're released to function independently as a dispatcher. It's a globally recognized standard, and it includes the process for triaging and prioritizing incident priority based upon the presumptive level of severity from the interrogation of the caller. And so it's a fairly elaborate process, but it's all computer driven. And so there's not a lot of freelancing that goes on. So when the dispatcher hears, and the first question they ask is the person breathing, and if not, it stops there, and they start giving what's called dispatch life instruction. And so they'll walk somebody through mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, CPR, emergency childbirth, and it's all scripted for them, so they don't have to make up anything. And so a layperson can be trained to be an emergency medical dispatcher, and we have brought people in with no medical experience whatsoever, and they've gone through the training, and they function very, very competently as an emergency medical dispatcher.
I commend your company for introducing the dispatchers and that level of competence here. And I know the gold standard, you have set the gold standard into this, and this is very commendable. I have seen some of your services offered, and it's first class, I'd say it's world class. You have that standard there, and I'm saying if I collapse, I would rather one of your paramedics see me than an intern or graduating, because the level of training they get, and I'm sure Dr. Parasram would realize, we will forget some of those basic trainings. And I've actually seen one of your persons who had that level of training give magnesium sulfate to a child with asthma. And this is something I would hesitate to do as a physician. So I commend you for that. Now, one thing I need to ask the Ministry of Health officials, are there any dispatchers trained? Like if persons call the health services in Port of Spain Hospital or whichever hospital, do they have that level of training? And if not, would you be willing to somehow train those officers or direct them to the relevant 811 number?
Well, I don't think at the hospital there are dispatchers trained. We have operators, more telephone operators, so they're telecommunications background. They would be aware of the requisite numbers to send persons on to, but the function at the hospital is completely different from the function of an ambulance service. So we have to, again, look at the calls that we have been receiving, look at the frequency, and we can review it and see if there's a need in particular areas. But as of now, the RHAs have not indicated to the ministry that there is a need in that particular area. But of course, seeing that there is a program in place with GMRTT, if there is a need, we can liaise with them to actually fill that gap.
Yeah, because I still see people calling on hospital first to get that input. So if in that timeline somebody could guide them, you know, somebody has an emergency, what to do in that situation, it may be very beneficial.
And I mean, in a hospital setting, there's always the ability to transfer to a department where there's a physician or a nurse that can assist in terms of calling if there's that level of emergency as well. So
but we may have to put that in place. We may have to put that in place. I would like to recognize Ms. Jennifer Batiste-Primus.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. Staying with the Ministry of Health, this question is directed to the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Ali. If you feel you are not you don't possess the information, I guess you'll pass it on to a member of your team. The questions that were sent, the responses that this committee got, with particular reference to Section 15 of the Act, where the Minister of Health has the authority to appoint inspectors or an inspection team to visit and inspect the facilities of GMRTT. The response was that the inspection team has not been appointed to date. Could you share with this committee what may be the reason or reasons for the non-appointment of inspectors or the inspection team? I refer to page 35 of your response.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Members, so we have not invoked the licensing process at this point. We are in the process of licensing the providers. What we do have in place at this point would be our internal audit department. They do visit the facilities of GMRTT, and they do provide some level of audit at the provider's facility.
While one appreciates that, Mr. Ali, you would agree with me that the framers of the law would have put in that specific requirement for a reason, so that what is the time frame the ministry is working with to ensure that Section 15 of the Act is implemented?
Chair, through you again. Remember, we're looking at the first quarter of next year.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I would like to direct these two questions to GMRTT. On page 2 of your response, with regards to the procurement procedures, you indicated that in terms of increasing or decreasing the fleet, you indicated that you intend to increase the fleet by 20 by the second quarter of fiscal 2019. Could you, in that context, provide the committee with an overview of the procurement methodology employed by GMRTT?
Sure. Purchasing ambulances starts with the purchase of the panel van, the chassis. And so we have requirements for that. Our preference is an automatic transmission, right-hand drive with sufficient engine displacement to handle the load. That whittles it down pretty severely. We will then choose a fabricator. In the past, we've locally converted vehicles that we've sourced through a local auto dealer, and that was successful. Our most recent procurement, I attended, as I do every year, a conference called Arab Health, which happens to have the largest
The conference is
called
term?
Arab Health. It's in Dubai every January. The reason why I go, in addition to heading 1 or 2 sessions, is that it is the largest trade exposition for healthcare in the world. And so every supplier from every corner of the world is represented there. And there are probably 20 ambulance builders. And so I met with some that had a product that sort of met my sniff test, if you will. And then we went through a process of negotiating with them. Build, it happens to be, in this instance, a fabricator in Dubai that has the Toyota Hiace chassis and a very, very high standard of fabrication. I actually have a person in Dubai right now that is completed the inspection on the completion of the build. I think perhaps even as we speak, those ambulances are about to be shipped by sea to us, and then we will receive them here, clear them from the normal importation controls, and then finish the outfit and put them in service. So our procurement is as a private agency. We negotiate with our suppliers, and our goal is to have a long-standing relationship with a builder, with a fabricator, so that we can continue to perfect that. I'm fortunate in that our American parent operates 7,000 ambulances and buys 2,000 ambulances a year. And so they have a full-time staff. We actually have a fabrication facility in Texas. And so our future might be to create a specialty vehicle. We are on an obligation under our contract now to purchase another 24 ambulances that we'll do sometime in 2019. And to deal with some of these issues that are special, I would like to think that a portion of those 24, perhaps 12 of them, might be a different type of vehicle that we can fabricate at our facility in Texas, where it's a high wheelbase, something that can ford, floodwaters and things like that. A more rugged, perhaps more rough ride, but something that can deal with sort of the terrain, extreme circumstances. It'd be nice to have that in the fleet, and I think we have an opportunity to do that.
Based on the information you have just shared, are those vehicles going to be new vehicles or pre-owned vehicles?
They're all new.
So your company has never engaged in purchasing pre-owned vehicles?
We did once. Out of desperation, I happened to find somebody that was selling 3 used panel vans. And so I snapped them up and had them converted locally to ambulances. And they served us for a good 4 years.
From which country do you all purchase vehicles, ambulances?
They're mostly Asian built. We have had not good success with South American built. I won't mention the brand because that's not fair, right? But it was a South American fabrication of a European brand. We didn't have really good success with that. We did, through the ministry, when they were purchasing the ambulances, we did acquire an English brand, and those served us well. The Asian chassis, I think, perform better to the terrain of Trinidad because the power to weight is a more generous ratio. And, because we don't have cold weather here, we don't have snow, and so our roads tend to have steeper pitch than you'll find in Europe. And so having a better power to weight ratio allows those ambulances to traverse the steeper inclines, where a lot of our patients reside.
And just shifting the focus a little, with respect to the licensing of GMRTT in providing the National Ambulance Service, is GMRTT in possession of a physical license to operate? And if yes, how often is this license renewed?
Maybe I can answer. GMRT is not in possession of a license, member, through the chair. As I mentioned earlier, we are in the process of licensing providers. So what currently exists, GMRTT is managed through the contractual arrangement that is what governs the relationship between the ministry and GMRTT at this point.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman of GMRTT, from where I sit, that is a gap in the operation of this company. I mean, the company is well-run, delivers a good service, but this issue is one I want to strongly recommend that urgent attention be paid and that the necessary license be granted to GMRTT. They are providing a national service. The law requires it, and therefore, Ministry of Health, you all need to step up to the plate.
I want to make it clear, as a company, we will apply for the license as soon as there's a process to do so. We don't have any qualms or reservations about that.
That's why it's not directed to you, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you.
Just to add, in terms of license, we're in the process of doing the licensing of the authorities. But in terms of the individual vehicles, we do inspect every single one of them and make a recommendation to the Ministry of Works that they can license in terms of ambulance. Is inspected by a physician that is trained in the field, and there's a checklist that is available to ensure that the ambulances are sound. So there's that monitoring that occurs already.
That's a secondary
mechanism
that
right.
the ministry has put in place, and I understand.
Sure.
But after GMRTT being in this country for 13 years, I think the point has been made? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just to follow up on Member Batiste's question, how soon before this regulatory committee is formed under Section 4 of the Act?
We will have that done before the end of the calendar year.
Okay.
So am I to understand we are operating outside the law with our ambulance service? Because if since 2009 we were mandated to have license, if someone takes legal action, would that have any sort of consequences?
Chair, we recognize that we have not been licensing the service providers, and we do take your point, and we have started the process. We needed to put the regulatory committee in place. We have gotten nominations from the RHAs, and the minister has his reps. We only are waiting on one, which is national security, and as soon as we get that, we will initiate. The committee has to do the recommendation with respect to the provider license. So we expect the first, at least during December. We have also written to all providers indicating that they are to make an application to the ministry if they are in the business of providing emergency ambulance services.
So how many providers, in addition to GMRTT, exist?
At this time, it's about 8.
8?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, that's a lot. I didn't think there were so many providers. Who are they, besides GMRTT?
We have small providers like Archangel, St. John's.
Red Cross also.
Red Cross, Eastern Divers. So we do have a few. Okay. At a much lower scale.
Yeah, Petrotrin has a fleet of 5 also. And then there's the private hospitals would also have their cadre. But one thing I want to ask to, just backtracking a bit, could you tell me the cost of outfitting, Mr. Anderson, one of your ambulance, fully equipped with all your equipment?
About $1 million.
Sorry?
$1 million.
$1 million. With medical equipment, everything, $1 million, right?
Yes.
So good.
TT.
Yeah. Well, I would hate if some patients, who may get in there aggressive and violent and gets loose there. So, I mean, you have to have some way of restraining and protecting. Yes. Question?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, through you, we also stream online, so we also try to give the people who are listening and watching online the benefit to get some of the questions in. So I just handed one. One of the questions that came from the web is, you mentioned that there were 16 paramedics involved. Somebody asked, where exactly are these 16 paramedics assigned to, if it's a specific area? And then I'll come to my question.
They're split between our north operating base in Port of Spain and our south operating base in La Romaine.
In terms of where your head office is in terms of the starting point, because Trinidad is a spread out area, I don't know if you're in Port of Spain, is it that these vehicles start at one point, or do you have offices throughout the area that will have an advantage moving on? That's the first question, if you can answer that.
We have 3 operating centers, north, south, and east. But that's just where the employee reports to work. When they go available from that at the start of their shift, they could be sent on a call or sent to cover an area almost anywhere in Trinidad. We try to minimize that, but things happen, and it's not uncommon for someone to start a shift, say, out of La Romaine and end up 6 hours later on a call in Arima. That certainly does happen. They don't start to Arima from La Romaine, though.
I know the public would want to know not where you start from a mover, but it's a moving.
It's what's called a fluid deployment system.
Yeah. In terms of, you mentioned the competition, do you all do other private events as well, or specifically just to the government?
Very rarely, somebody will make an inquiry and ask for I can't think of a single case where we've done a private transport. Sometimes somebody having an event.
Like a sports day or those kind of things?
A lot of those we do free of charge. We have to be very discriminating with those. Most of the time, when somebody calls and wants to hire us, our rate is much, much higher than the other providers. And so they tend to price shop and use somebody else.
So part of the gap I mentioned was the accessibility of mentally ill patients trying to get to the hospital. Is there any level of having mental health officers or persons trained in the mental health? Because I think part of our challenge now, we know mental illness is increasing in the country. 1 in 4 persons may have it, and you will have more calls to apprehend certain persons who may be on drugs, persons who are having a meltdown now, they're psychotic patients. What sort of training would your staff have in apprehending those persons? And again, that's one question. And the other question is the ministry. Is there anything you could suggest that we can help that situation in terms of joint effort with mental health officers in the area to apprehend those persons?
The EMTs and the paramedics are trained in what we call behavioral emergencies. And part of that includes restraint of the patient, appropriate and safe. One of the benefits of the paramedic level, advanced life support, is they can use physical restraint and chemical restraint. And chemical restraint is, as I'm sure you are aware, is the preferred methodology because it's safer for the patient and for the care providers and downstream when we hand that patient over to the receiving facility. Mental health emergencies and behavioral emergencies is a challenge for every EMS system in the world. I know of a few projects that our company in the United States is involved with of specialty ambulance that are staffed with a mental health professional that handle those cases. That's very costly. But it is probably something to think about in Trinidad is a half dozen or so of those. One of the big challenges we have with mental health cases is when they occur after hours, and they tend to occur after hours.
For the officials in the ministry, we may have to have a roster with mental health officers in each area that could be deployed, as if they are called out, some level of payment could be given to the mental health officers, because each area, we have about 27 psychiatric health centers scattered throughout the country. And there are mental health officers assigned to each of those areas, probably 3 or 4. So what I'm suggesting, we may have to make a system where we put them on a roster where they can be called out, and probably paid when they are called out to assist your services in case they are called out.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable suggestion because after hours 1 is difficult to access the mental health officers who really act under the Mental Health Act to actually, in collaboration with the police. So one gap is definitely accessibility of the mental health officers to get to the cases. So we have to put something in place. If it requires overtime, we have to consider it as well. I think the increase in number of mental health officers may need to be looked at as well. But collaboration with the police is an essential thing that we have been trying to work on through the mental health unit at the Ministry of Health, through MHGAP training as well, to see if we can actually get them a little more amenable to these kinds of illnesses and emergencies.
Our duty is to solve some of these problems and have suggestions. Yeah? So all those ideas together, we will have to put something in place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is directed to the Ministry of Health. Perhaps the Director of Health Policy Research and Planning may be useful in this regard. The committee was informed that the Internal Audit Department conducts periodic assessment of the financial payments made to the contractor and claims. Can you confirm when the last assessment and reconciliation of services provided by GMRTT was conducted by the Ministry of Health?
Thank you, member, for the question. The audit is ongoing since the commencement of the contract since 2015. There's an ongoing process of auditing because the submission of reports is as GMRTT indicated, every monthly, every quarter. So the audit is ongoing as the process continues.
And Mr. Director of Policy Planning, I don't understand what you just told me. What does it mean? The audit is ongoing. That's public service language that I'm very familiar with. What does that mean? Is it that the audit is 50% completed, 60%, 25%? So we can get, the committee can get a feel.
So Chair, through you, maybe I can just explain a bit. We have two aspects at the ministry. You have the financial aspect. When we are invoiced by GMRTT, our audit department, as I said, they will review those claims and recommend payments accordingly. That's part of the audit function. The other part of it, and Mr. Anderson mentioned it, the monthly reports. When we get those reports, we don't just use them as the data. We will also validate the information in there. That's not done by the audit department. That's done out of the office of the CMO with his technical staff. So that's the other part of the audit function. Maybe the word auditors may be misleading. But let's say the review function. I'm not sure if that helps.
Okay, I'm pretty satisfied with the addendum that you gave there, but who at the ministry verifies that the ministry is getting value for money? We know that the company GMRTT has been around. We know the perception is in the minds of people, and even those of us who sit here, that GMRTT delivers an efficient professional service. But that's not the issue here. The issue is from the ministry's point of view, who is responsible for verifying or ensuring that the ministry is getting value for money?
Chief Medical Officer.
Yes?
No, I think he's saying the answer being the Office of the Chief Medical Officer.
Right,
so
and could you share with this committee, how do you go about, you and your team, how do you go about measuring value for money? So
we get the reports. The reports are actually normally collated through the Directorate of Health Policy and Planning, so it comes to me. It goes down to Health Policy and Planning. They actually look at the reports, analyze them to some extent, and send it up back. And we look at the trends, we look at the number of, basically the outputs we look at are the number of cases they would have seen, the types of cases over the period, which is usually a 3-month period at a time. So we certify based on a 3-month period of reporting. So that is verified using the RHA framework as well. So if I have any concerns in terms of transfers, we can verify it, because the forms that are normally given by GMRTT at handover is also stored at the RHAs. So there's triplicates of the form. So I think GMRTT stores one, and there's one at the RHA as well, and then there's another form that goes back. So we can verify through that mechanism, and have been going back to the RHAs to ask them from time to time to do spot checks to see if they match back in terms of the patients that are sent to us. So there's that verification mechanism that we have been using on a quarterly basis.
Okay, thank you. And finally, has the ministry are you all in a position to calculate the dollar value for each emergency ambulance response? If you're not
Yes,
in a position to
we can
forward the information now,
can-
you can forward it to us subsequently.
Yeah, so we have the total number of cases that were responded to. We have the total contractual sum, so we can calculate it and get it to the committee.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
A question? Okay. So I think we have clarified a bit that we may have the greater collaboration for the Ministry of Health in terms of when they enter the hospital setting, the handover time, or as well as the collaboration with the police. We will have to look at the police officers and mental health officers. There was an instance I just want to raise that a member of the public raised to me, and I was actually attending a function at Medulla Art Gallery on the 27th of October with a former Senator, Rahul. And someone had a seizure. And this is their response, a little synopsis of what happened. It took over 1 hour from the time we called the ambulance, 811, to the time she received medical attention from the emergency services. 15 seizures later. Now, she was there, and I came in close to the end. She actually, 15 seizures later, the young lady received some attention. It's also to be noted that at the time we called 1558, I don't know which provider service that is, there was one ambulance available to respond, which was coming from Arima. We called a total of 4 times and were told on 2 occasions that the only available ambulance was in the east. This means that for the entire period of 1 hour, there was no emergency response ambulance available to service the entire stretch from west to Arima. Now, why I brought this point in is, you may have, you have excellent services, you have excellent ambulances, good service. We have come a long way. But we still have little instances like this that we may have to now see what's happening there, right? So do you have any response about this scenario?
It's hard for me to comment on a specific case like that. I could certainly look it up and find it.
Yeah.
But it's oftentimes misleading. And this sounds critical, and I don't intend it to be, is that when you're there at an emergency, seconds become minutes, minutes become hours. If we had a 1-hour response in Port of Spain, I would have heard about it.
Well, the thing is, I was at that function. I didn't know what time they called,
right.
But when I reached to the end, I would say it's about half hour I was there at that function, and she was there. Now, 2 numbers they call there, right? So what I'm looking at, if they are not getting through to you, is there any backup services that they could have called? There's the other ambulance services, because there's another number there. So we have to have, in my opinion, a backup service, a second line. I know, if you're not getting through to you, there's an emergency. I would hate if there's an emergency and, they're making various calls and not getting a response. So I can, so any sort of comments that...
What is happening now is we are experiencing substantial delays at turnover at the institutions.
Yes.
And it does happen where every ambulance in Port of Spain is at Port of Spain General Hospital waiting to offload. And that puts a stress on us that the ministry is very well aware of it. The RHAs are very well aware of it. It's a capacity issue. And when it happens, it tends to extrapolate, right? Is that one delay becomes now 2, 3, 4, yes. And then suddenly you don't have anywhere to be able to take a patient and offload. And so, until the entire system can surge, is that causes an imposition on our ability to respond. Resolving that is effectively like going out and buying $1 million ambulances and putting them on the road.
For the officials on the ministry, is there a system where if their ambulance call the casualty department, there is there's a prep team waiting, a response team waiting to receive someone from an ambulance setting? Because you guys do a tremendous effort of resuscitating the equipment you have, and you bring them up to a point of casualty. We are seeing a delay there. So the cost that we are putting out to your company, I think it's like $123.3 million, I think, Ministry of Health pays to you. So let us say you have provided such an excellent service. You have brought somebody up to the hospital level, but there's a delay now of 20, 30 minutes to get them just in another trolley to go to that casualty setting where there may be another delay. So I think there's a little gap there we need to know. Is there a calling system that that, you now identify the emergency, you have actually implemented, the correct standard of care. But when you reach the hospital setting, now you may have that care, not being up to standard, or that level of care not being fast enough, the haste in it. So, comment.
We could defer to Dr. Sinanan in his capacity as head of department for San Fernando A&E.
Yes.
And he would have been one of the heads of department that would have worked when we had the issue with the trolleys and tried to resolve the issue. So maybe he could let you know what happened at San Fernando.
Yeah, oh, sure. But it's not just the trolleys. There's the issue of having your team ready to take somebody. So somebody has a heart attack or stroke, you have a team willing and ready to take the second line management very quickly. Yeah, so.
Morning, Chair.
Morning.
Yes, the short answer to your question is yes. Once they call in, we do take over those patients immediately. Care is not delayed. So even though the turnaround time for their equipment might be 20 minutes, 25 minutes, that doesn't affect the patient care. It just means sometimes we may not be able to transfer from their trolley to ours, but we will initiate care on that trolley if necessary. But in terms of the critical care, we worked with GMRTT over the last year or so to set up something called Chat, which is one of their systems that they work with us to put onto our computers in the emergency department.
Yes.
So there's a method then that they can communicate. I have a level 1 transfer, etc., with an ETA, estimated time of arrival, and then we will get ourselves ready.
And is this available in other hospitals like Port of Spain or Mount Hope also?
Yes, the call-in system does apply to all hospitals.
Okay.
To varying degrees in different areas.
Just to ask a question. So if one of the public hospitals is not available in terms of a turnaround time to transfer, do you all take them to only private hospitals? Or is that a no-no? They don't go to private hospitals at all, you only deal with the public hospitals?
There's been some vacillation of that. The prior administration instituted a policy to allow us on patient request to go to a private institution. That was never memorialized into formal policy, and that's since been redacted.
Through you, Chairman, I know we're reaching the end, we almost to wind up. You all started off stating how you're affiliated to the #1 organization in terms of ambulance in the U.S. How do they rank worldwide? And do we like to calibrate and benchmark with the other islands which we are part of? Are you all, well, maybe you all or the parent company, doing the same facility in other Caribbean islands? And if so, which islands?
In the Caribbean, we only operate in Trinidad and Tobago.
In terms of #1 in the U.S., how is that calibrated, and what is the competition like, and how does it calibrate worldwide in terms of where you rank?
Our two accreditations really speak. I mean, in 2008, we were the first EMS agency outside of North America, so certainly the first in the developing world and in this region to be accredited by the Commission on Accreditation of Ambulance Services. It's the gold standard. In fact, it's a point of pressure with me in that agency because the map that they use on their website is only North America, and so we didn't make the map, and I'm threatening to pull the accreditation until they get a global map so we can at least appear on the map. That speaks volumes because, and I did that as CEO in 2008 in building this company and leading to that. It took us 2 years, so we started in 2006. That forced us to fully develop the organization. So things that weren't, on the front pressure cooker, it required us to go into the corners of the organization and build capacity and formalize policy. So it was a good blueprint to create a world-class agency. With respect to the other Caribbean islands, we've surpassed all that I'm familiar with. Aruba probably comes closest, but they don't deal with anywhere close to the volume and severity of the cases that we deal with. Compared to the United States, all the way back in 2006, we retrained all the staff that came across from SWARA. Is a point of pride for me, is that when they took the U.S. National Registry exam, they outperformed the average in the United States for that year. And so, those two things, in addition to the accreditation and dispatch, to me give validation that when we say we're a world-class agency, we are. I know just anecdotally from being in this industry for 30 years, is that GMRTT in Trinidad is a very, very close sibling to an AMR operation in a mixed urban, suburban, rural, and wilderness operating area anywhere in the United States. We stand up very, very competently to the best that our company does.
Speaking about training, the medical director of clinical quality assurance, do you have somebody in that post presently?
Yes, we have a medical director.
Would you mind naming that member?
It's Dr. Simona Bood.
Okay,
she's new.
She's new because I know the other doctor, Dr. Singh, had left.
Yeah, he migrated
Good. So
for
you have
personal
somebody
reasons.
in that place to do that training. Because I was very impressed with the training that was given by your previous clinical assurance director. I need to ask one question. With our input of nationals from the Latin America, do you have any sort of, there's the phones now with the apps that if there's a language problem, Spanish or even Chinese, we had a Chinese national recently collapsed, and the doctors could not make head or tails what was the language, what was being transmitted, how to ascertain what was the problem. Do you have any apps that those officers would have to have that language barrier somehow dealt with?
We do have that piece of technology. It's very clumsy because it's hard to detect what language you're trying to translate. Mm-hmm. The automatic translation technology isn't advanced, I think, to the point of it being reliable in an emergency setting. One of the recently added inquiries we do at hiring now is check for Spanish speaking and Spanish language skills. Mm-hmm. And we have it on our training plan for 2019 for a rudimentary Spanish medical language course. So the paramedics can ask, simple questions like point to where it hurts, are you having trouble breathing, that sort of thing. There's no way we'll ever get to a point of being able to handle in an emergency setting any language that there is. And again, because you may recognize it as an Asian dialect, but you don't know which one. And so it's very difficult. And so the paramedic just responds to other cues about patient condition.
But I mentioned there's a simple WhatsApp on your phone you can get now and you get some translation. So this may be something to consider for your personnel to have. And then another question I'd like, let's say somebody calls your ambulance and they collapse. Is there any sort of link with the B-Mobile Digicel that if that call is not completed, you can now trace where that location is?
We don't have, that's called ANI-ALI. It's automatic number identification and automatic line identification. The telecommunications in this country has not advanced to that point. For example, in the United States, the cellular providers have been legislatively required to achieve the same number identification location on a mobile phone as on a fixed line, because all that technology was created when everybody used landline telephones. And so it was very easy to triangulate on the spot where the phone was. They've been mandated in terms of their licensing service operators in the United States to create that same capacity. We don't have that yet. We do use GPS technology, but the minute that capacity is created in the telecommunications industry, our systems are capable of taking that in.
So probably the legal advisor, Ms. Barbie Upchan, may look into somehow if we could put that into legislation. Telecommunications, link up, because I think that is vital. If a patient collapses, you have no way of knowing where that patient is located. So I suggest that. I must commend you for thinking ahead about the flooding issues and trying to equip ambulance that may be able to go into flood areas. But you have stated that Your staff is engaged once per year in focused education programs centered on disaster response. Please confirm who provides this training and when was the last training exercise conducted? And also, could you explain how you modify your operation in the immediate aftermath of the national flooding disaster of October 2018? And in cases of mass casualties, like vehicular accidents, what action plan is to be implemented? Okay. So 3 questions. I'll repeat it as well. The first thing, let's go, please. Who provides this training for any sort of disaster response? When was the last training exercise conducted?
It's annual training, so it would have been done sometime in 2018. I don't have the specific date. The training is provided by our education department. It's through that college that we stood up a campus. As it relates to the floods, that's always a challenge because it's a challenge of access. Our efforts are coordinated with ODPM to bring other assets that can bring the patient to us. It gets pretty creative and there's a lot of ingenuity. During the floods, probably the biggest problem that we faced was when the North-South Highway was closed and the country was bifurcated. We actually had to hire a boat to bring staff from San Fernando to relieve the dispatchers, and then we had to put that dispatch team in a hotel overnight so that they could report to work the next day after adequate rest. I was really worried if that was a prolonged problem because we were fortunate that by happenstance we had the right number of ambulances on both sides of that divide. But if I started to have vehicle problems or something south, I wouldn't have any way to redeploy ambulances from north. And so it's good that we have things dispersed around the country to begin with, but that circumstance stressed this entire country, including the ambulance service, without question.
So after the flooding, is there any way you modified your operations? I mean, you have planned to get the new ambulance services, but any way you have modified your operation?
It's not really necessary for us to modify because the medical emergencies are going to occur. Certainly during a national disaster, we call out additional staff and that sort of thing, and we scale up to our maximum capacity. But most often, mass casualty incidents don't give any warning, and so it's just an adaptability of being able to redeploy resources for something that maybe requires 5 ambulances. Those happen with some frequency, and so all of our personnel are trained in their role in the incident command system. And I would say the coordination on the ground between agencies of national security, us, ODPM, when they get involved, on the ground it works pretty well, I would say.
You also indicated that a significant deficit has grown between the fees for service invoiced by GMRTT to the Ministry of Health and the payment remitted to the GMRTT by the Ministry of Health. What was the size of this deficit for the years 2017 and 2018?
So, Chair, what that speaks to, the contract speaks to any responses made over the contracted monthly sum is invoiced to the ministry separately. We do have an audit process to verify those invoices. That has been ongoing. We've settled 2 quarters of that. Until the quantum, I don't have the quantum
So
available.
then there's a flat monthly fee paid out, but if there are any additional, for a certain amount of services offered, but beyond that, if there are additional numbers, you pay by invoice. Is that the way things run?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Have you ever considered other services, other provider services? Would people say that there might be a monopoly in the system? I mean, could you give us an input? Because I think there's other ambulance services like Red Cross, St. John's, and they may not be up to mark, but is there any way that we could look at that cases of other services being available also?
Chair, yes, we can look at that. We can look at that when we're reviewing the current contract, because we do have a contract with GMRT at this point in time. That's something that we definitely can look at the ministry. Yes.
Yes. When would your contract be? How long? How long is your contract for? Was it from 2015?
Yeah.
2015.
2020. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, so the contract is in 5-year cycles?
The current contract is a 5-year contract.
Okay.
Right. Now, we looked at the operation of the GMRTT and Ministry of Health. Now, Ministry of Health, do you have your ambulance services up and running? Or are there, because there are ambulances, I know, with the regional health authorities. Are they functional? Are they equipped, well equipped? You can give me a feedback on how many ambulance services they are available.
Chair, so I can start the answer and CMO will take it from there. In terms of the ambulance service, the service provided by the RHS is not an emergency ambulance service. All right, those are really for inter-facility transport.
Sorry?
Inter-facility transports.
Okay.
Between hospitals, health centers, what have you. They don't respond to calls from the public. All right. In terms of the numbers, we currently have 47 ambulances in total across the 4 RHAs.
And could you give me, are they equipped? Because according to the Act, right, the minimal medical equipment for basic ambulance, for land ambulance, yeah, you know, I would, you know, want to know, are these ambulances that you have for hospital services, are they equipped according to this Act with the basic requirements?
Yes, they are.
I mean, if we could put that request in writing if you do not have it.
If you want the information.
Yeah, okay, let me see, sorry.
Yeah, as I said, they are. They meet the requirements for the basic life support.
Basic life support,
Yes.
equipment, defibrillator, everything is in it, right?
Yes.
Good. There was an instant I got another complaint about an individual. Now, this does not have to do with Ministry of Health or probably with your company, but it's something that it's in the, it's there, it occurs, it's also in it happened in the airports actually. In the airport where someone was traveling, he got a heart attack. They called out the ambulance service from the airport's authority, I think it was. And the complaint was there was no sort of equipment in the ambulance. They mentioned Red Cross, I didn't verify, that is attached here. They also mentioned that the training, there was a lot to be coming from the training. The nurse, the ambulance driver, they didn't have any sort of basic training. This guy collapsed there, a heart patient, when they were trying to, they say the resuscitation efforts were minimal, nothing was really done. And when they tried to say, listen, we want to go to Mount Hope Hospital where there is the facilities, they were told by that ambulance service, no, we could only take you a REMA. So 2 things comes up there. One, the service provider there was probably not up to mark. 2, the other thing is when you're now having to make a decision, which is the best hospital to go to. Now, I don't know if that person would have lived if they had gone to Mount Hope, which offers excellent services into cardiac resuscitation. And it brings up a third point. If there's an international person here traveling and collapses at the airport, that would be a major embarrassment for our country. So could you give any input on that? Yeah.
Sure. So the Ministry of Health has a public health department which acts almost like to ensure that no communicable disease comes off a flight. So it is not a true health bay in the way it was meant to be and was never structurally designed as such. So basically we have health control officers and we have a line to the county medical officer of health. The Red Cross, I believe, operates out of the airport at present, and they are contracted by the airport's authority. So the service that is run there is contracted by the airport's authority. So it's not a Ministry of Health service or RHA service at this point in time. And we have recognized the gap that you have showed to us as well. And there is need to actually have either GMRTT, have an ambulance placed there or one of the regional health authorities, the North Central Regional Health Authority. We have already begun discussion with them to see how they can actually equip the Port Health Unit better. And we have spoken at least a public health trained nurse to be on staff 24 hours a day as a first initial placement, and then even a medical officer being on staff with the requisite equipment as well. There's some equipment in the Port Health unit which resembles a crash cart, but is not complete. So in terms of going forward, I think we already have plans, physical plans for infrastructural upgrade of the Port Health unit, which is with the Airports Authority right now for validation, and just in terms of because they have to do the upgrade for us. So they are validating that. Once we get it back, we are pushing forward towards upgrade of the facility, and then to do the staffing through the regional health authorities to make sure that we have 24-hour presence at the airport. So we have recognized the gap as well.
Being able to recognize the gap and working towards it, but I think we all need to push something on our part to see. I don't know if the Airports Authority is it under our portfolio, so we may need to push that, because if I'm saying it could be an international embarrassment for us if something happens here. So thank you for trying to address it and push it. So coming to an end of this hearing, are there any questions, any members?
Not for me, Mr. Chairman. I am satisfied at this point in time that the country is getting a reliable service from GMRTT, and I commend them for that, and also the Ministry of Health. But I want to commend the Ministry of Health greater the next time around when they come, that they would have addressed the issue of the license.
Anyone is right? Yeah. So in closing, I would like to invite the following persons to make closing remarks. Mr. Asif Ali.
Thank you, Chair, members. Thank you, committee, for the rich discussion. We've taken on board at the Ministry of Health some of the recommendations with regard to the greater public awareness of the 811 number. I think what came out definitely, and we recognize that, is a greater collaboration between the agencies. You mentioned the police, the mental health officers, Airports Authority. We have recognized that, and we have started to work on that. There's always room for improvement, and we will be working on those. And just to reassure the member that the licensing will be sorted out before we meet again. Thank you.
Good. Mr. John Aboud.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. We were very happy to come before you this morning, because over the years we've had to bite our lips and take the pressure, because it wasn't our place to make any public comments. As our employee, the Ministry of Health is the one that we report to, and only them. But so we were very happy to have the opportunity this morning to clarify and clear the air on some issues. I, as a Trinidadian, take great pride in what GMRTT has evolved into. It is, in fact, at some point in the future, we want to invite the committee to visit the facility and see for yourself the kind of technology, the kind of training, the aptitude and the attitude of Trinidadians who are working there. So we're very proud of that. I get many, many, many more compliments about the service than I do about the bad service. But we will strive, and we're not there yet. And everything you've asked for, Chair, is doable. I mean, it's not my place to say, but everything has a cost. So you want a rocket, you can get it. It's going to cost money. And therefore, I guess the ministry and government policy have to decide, have to draw a line at a scale as to how much we could spend and what we can get for how much we could spend. And I think we're doing a good job at that. So as I close, I want to wish everyone a happy holiday season, and hopefully we'll see you all again sometime in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I thank you, Mr. John Aboud. Yes. So we hope you don't have to go in your ambulance, but yes. Sir. So I thank you all. I thank you all for coming here. I thank the members for this. It was a very productive meeting. We follow the gaps. We know the gaps, and we're going to work at it. And hopefully, if we need to call again, we would call in future. And I invite members of the public who are listening to please, if they have any sort of comments, they can probably send it to us, any areas that we left out. So I thank you all, and please have a good afternoon.